The cold wind swept across the Arizona territory, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter. Sarah Miller pulled her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stared at the distant horizon. The land before her was vast and unforgiving, painted in shades of amber and rust beneath the setting sun. Her face, once smooth and youthful, now bore the unmistakable scars of her survival, pitted marks that told a story more painful than words could express. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months had passed since the smallpox had claimed the last of her family. 3 months of wandering, of sleeping beneath the stars, of being turned away from every settlement and homestead she approached. Fear was a powerful force, perhaps, more contagious than the disease that had spared only her. Sarah closed her eyes, the memories washing over her like the cold mountain streams she used to bathe in. The cries of her younger brother Daniel as the fever took him, her mother Martha's whispered prayers that faded into silence, her father William's final request, "Live, Sarah, find a way to live." But how could she live in a world that saw her only as death walking? As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the granite mountains, Sarah made a decision. She would journey north, toward the lands they said belonged to the native tribes. Perhaps there, among people who hadn't yet learned to fear her scars, she might find something worth living for. With nothing but the clothes on her back, a small knife tucked into her boot, and the silver locket containing the only image of her family that remained, Sarah Miller stepped forward into the growing darkness, unaware that her path would soon cross with a woman whose wisdom would change everything. Sarah had been walking for days, following game trails and keeping distant from the main roads where settlers might spot her. The last encounter with travelers had ended with shotguns aimed at her chest and threats to put down the diseased one before she infects us all. She'd fled into the forest, heart pounding, lungs burning, wondering if death might have been kinder than this existence. The smallpox had come to Willow Creek in the early spring, carried by a merchant from the east. Sarah's father, the town blacksmith, had been among the first to fall ill. Their small cabin had quickly become a sick room for the entire family. The town doctor visited once, his face pale with fear beneath his mask, leaving medicine he promised. It would help. It didn't. One by one, Sarah had watched them succumb. First her father, his strong hands rendered useless by fever. Then Daniel, only 12, and still believing his sister could save him somehow. And finally, her mother, who had fought the longest, whispering stories of better days until her voice faded forever. And then, inexplicably, Sarah had begun to recover. Her fever broke. Her strength returned, even as the disease left its permanent signature across her skin. By the time she could stand again, Willow Creek had emptied of the living. Those who hadn't died had fled, burning homes and possessions in their wake. Now, as she crested a hill overlooking a narrow valley, Sarah spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that the last of her jerky had been consumed 2 days prior. Water she could find in streams, but food required either charity or theft. Sarah hesitated, her hand instinctively rising to touch the scars on her face. Perhaps if she approached at dusk, kept her face hidden beneath her shawl, she might be able to beg for scraps without revealing her condition. The thought filled her with shame, but hunger was a powerful motivator. As the sun began its descent, Sarah made her way carefully toward the cabin. It was small but well built, with a fenced garden and a lean-to shelter where a single horse dozed. She watched from the edge of the trees, gathering her courage, rehearsing words that might inspire pity without inspiring fear. Finally, as the first stars appeared in the eastern sky, Sarah emerged from the forest and approached the cabin door. Her heart hammered in her chest as she raised her hand to knock. The door swung open before her knuckles could make contact. A woman stood in the doorway, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, a shotgun held comfortably in her weathered hands. "I saw you watching from the trees," the woman said, her voice neither friendly nor hostile. "What business do you have here?" Sarah kept her face angled downward, the shawl drawn forward. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am. I've been traveling for many days and I'm hungry. I can work for food, chop wood, tend animals, whatever you need." The woman was silent for a long moment, the barrel of the shotgun lowering slightly. "Where are you headed, girl?" "North," Sarah said, the single word carrying the weight of her uncertainty. "North is a big place. You running from something or towards something?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Both, I suppose." The woman made a sound. That might have been a laugh. "Honest, at least. I'm Emily Watson. My husband's been gone these 3 years. Fever took him. I manage alone now." Sarah nodded, still careful to keep her face hidden. "Look at me, girl," Emily said suddenly, her voice firming. "I don't give charity to those who won't meet my eyes." Sarah hesitated, then slowly raised her head, letting the shawl fall back. She braced herself for the familiar reactions, the gasp, the recoil, the fear quickly hardening into hatred. Emily's expression remained unchanged, her eyes meeting Sarah's, directly. "Smallpox," she said matter-of-factly. "You survived." Sarah nodded, tears threatening at this simple acknowledgement of her existence. "Well," Emily said, stepping back from the doorway, "the stew won't eat itself. Come in before you catch your death in this wind." The warmth of the cabin enveloped Sarah as she stepped inside, the smell of beef stew making her dizzy with hunger. Emily gestured to a chair at a small table. "Sit, eat, then you can tell me your story." Emily placed the shotgun in a rack by the door, then ladled a generous portion of stew into a wooden bowl, though I suspect I know parts of it already. Sarah ate slowly at first, then with increasing speed as her body responded to the first real meal she'd had in weeks. Emily sat across from her, sipping from a mug of coffee, watching with steady eyes. When the bowl was empty, Sarah found her voice again. "Thank you. I haven't been treated with kindness in a long time." Emily nodded. "Fear makes monsters of decent folks. I nursed my Henry through the fever. Didn't take me, didn't take you. Some of us are just made differently, I suppose." Sarah touched the locket at her throat. "My whole family, everyone in our settlement, they're all gone. And those who survived ran from you," Emily said, her voice gentle now, "thinking you carried death with you." Sarah nodded, the familiar weight of isolation pressing down on her. "You can stay the night," Emily said after a moment. "The barn is clean and warm enough. Tomorrow I'll give you provisions for your journey." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the words inadequate for the enormity of this simple human kindness. "But I should warn you," Emily continued, her expression growing serious. "The territories north of here are dangerous in different ways. The army has been pushing the native tribes, Navajo, Apache, others, into smaller and smaller areas. There's bitterness on both sides. A woman alone would be at risk from either." Sarah's fingers tightened around the empty bowl. "I have nowhere else to go. Every settlement I've approached has driven me away. Some shot at me," Emily sighed, the sound carrying the weight of her own hardships. "There's a settlement called Copper Ridge, 3 days' ride northwest. The people there are God-fearing, but not unreasonable. My brother Thomas is the leader of their council. I could write you a letter asking him to give you a chance." Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest, fragile as a butterfly's wing. "You would do that for me?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We're all God's children," Emily said simply, "even those marked by misfortune." She stood, gathering Sarah's empty bowl. "Rest now. Tomorrow comes early on a farm." That night, curled in clean hay in Emily's barn, Sarah slept deeply for the first time in months, the horse's gentle breathing, a comforting rhythm in the darkness. Dawn broke clear and cold, the promise of winter carried on the biting wind. Emily provided Sarah with a pack containing bread, dried meat, a water skin, and a folded letter sealed with wax. "The journey to Copper Ridge will take you through Whispering Pine Forest," Emily explained, pointing to the northwest. "Follow the game trail until you reach Silver River, then head upstream. The settlement sits where 3 valleys meet. My brother Thomas will help you if you show him this letter." Sarah clutched the pack to her chest, overcome with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." Emily's weathered face softened. "Live, girl. That's thanks enough in this hard world." As Sarah prepared to depart, Emily hesitated, then disappeared. Into the cabin, she returned with a faded blue bonnet. "Take this. It won't hide your scars completely, but it might make your journey a little easier." Sarah accepted the gift with trembling hands. The simple act of consideration threatened to unravel the careful control she maintained over her emotions. "God go with you, Sarah Miller," Emily said, stepping back. Sarah adjusted the bonnet, squared her shoulders, and began walking toward the distant tree line. She did not look back, though she felt Emily's gaze following her until the trees swallowed her from view. The Whispering Pine Forest was aptly named. The wind moved through the tall pines with a sound like hushed conversations. Sarah found the game trail Emily had mentioned and followed it deeper into the wilderness, her footsteps cushioned by years of fallen needles. By midday, the forest had thickened, the trail becoming less distinct. Sarah paused to drink from her water skin and eat a small portion of bread. The solitude, once her greatest fear, now felt almost peaceful. Here, there were no eyes to judge, no faces to turn away in disgust. As she prepared to continue her journey, a sound broke the forest's quiet murmuring. A low, rumbling growl that raised the hair on the back of her neck. Sarah turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Not 20 paces away, a mountain lion crouched on a fallen log, its amber eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. It was massive, its tawny coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight, powerful, muscles tense beneath its skin. Sarah's hand moved to her small knife, though she knew it would offer little protection against such a formidable predator. Her mind raced, trying to remember stories her father had told about encounters with mountain lions. "Stand tall. Make noise. Don't run." Slowly, Sarah rose to her full height, spreading her arms to appear larger. "Go away!" she shouted, her voice sounding thin and unconvincing even to her own ears. The mountain lion's tail twitched, its eyes never leaving her face. It lowered its body further, preparing to spring. In that moment, as Sarah faced death in yet another form, a high, clear whistle cut through the tension. The mountain lion's head swiveled toward the sound, its ears flicking forward. From behind a cluster of pines emerged a woman unlike any Sarah had ever seen. She was neither young nor old, her copper skin etched with lines of experience rather than age. Her black hair, streaked with silver, was braided with small beads and feathers. She wore a long dress of soft leather adorned with intricate beadwork, and in her hands she carried a wooden staff topped with feathers and crystals that caught the sunlight. The woman advanced slowly, continuing to make a series of whistling sounds that seemed to confuse the mountain lion. It growled again, but with less conviction, its gaze darting between Sarah and the newcomer. The woman spoke words in a language Sarah didn't understand, her voice carrying authority without aggression. To Sarah's amazement, the mountain lion's posture relaxed slightly. The woman took another step forward, tapping her staff rhythmically against the ground. After what seemed an eternity, the mountain lion turned and leaped from the log, disappearing into the underbrush with surprisingly little sound. Sarah's legs gave way and she sank to the ground, her heart thundering in her chest. The woman approached her, dark eyes assessing. "You are far from your people," the woman said in accented but clear English. Sarah looked up, instinctively reaching to adjust her bonnet to hide her scars. I don't have people anymore." The woman's gaze was direct, taking in Sarah's marked face without reaction. "Everyone has people. Some just haven't found them yet." She extended a hand. "I am Nijoni Begay. In your tongue it means beautiful." Sarah hesitated, then accepted the offered hand, allowing Nijoni to help her to her feet. "Sarah Miller, thank you for saving me." Nijoni nodded, her eyes now scanning the forest around them. "This is not a good place for a woman. Alone, where do you journey to?" "A settlement called Copper Ridge," Sarah said, reaching into her pack to ensure Emily's letter was still safe. "I have a letter for the leader there." Nijoni's expression changed subtly, a shadow passing over her features. "Copper Ridge. Yes, I know of this place." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "What will you do there?" Sarah realized she hadn't thought beyond reaching the settlement. I'm hoping to find work, a place to belong, with your face marked by the spotted sickness." Nijoni's question held no cruelty, only pragmatic assessment. Sarah touched her cheek self-consciously. "The letter is from the sister of the settlement's leader. She promised he would help me." Nijoni studied her for a long moment, then nodded, decisively. "Night comes soon. My home is not far. You will stay until morning, then continue your journey." Sarah hesitated. Emily's kindness had been unexpected. Two such encounters seemed almost too fortunate to believe. "Why would you help me?" Nijoni's lips curved in a small smile. "The mountain lion did not take you. That means your path is not yet complete." She turned, gesturing for Sarah to follow. "Come. There are more dangerous things in these woods than mountain lions." With few alternatives and guided by an instinct she couldn't name, Sarah followed Nijoni through the forest. They traveled, in silence for nearly an hour, moving deeper into wilderness that showed no sign of human presence. Just as Sarah began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake, they emerged into a small clearing. A modest hogan, a traditional Navajo dwelling, stood. At the center, its rounded walls made of logs and earth. Nearby, a small garden showed signs of recent harvest, and herbs hung drying from a rack beside the entrance. "This is your home?" Sarah asked, surprised to find such a solitary dwelling so far from any settlement. "For now," Nijoni replied, ducking through the low entrance. Sarah followed her inside. The interior was surprisingly spacious and warm. A small fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising toward a hole in the ceiling. Woven rugs in vibrant patterns covered the packed earth floor, and bundles of herbs hung from the wooden framework supporting the roof. "Sit," Nijoni instructed, gesturing to a woven mat near the fire. "You must be hungry." Sarah settled by the fire, watching as Nijoni moved with practiced efficiency, adding ingredients to a pot already simmering over the flames. The aroma of unfamiliar spices filled the air, making Sarah's stomach growl despite her earlier meal. "You live here alone?" Sarah asked, trying to understand this woman who seemed so self-contained, so complete in her solitude. Nijoni stirred the pot before answering. "I am a healer. My people are scattered now, some on the long walk to the reservation, others hiding in canyons the blue coats cannot find. I stay here between worlds to heal any who need my help." "The spotted sickness, smallpox, does it affect your people too?" Sarah asked. A shadow crossed Nijoni's face. It has taken many. The white man's diseases come before the white man himself, carried on trade goods and blankets. She looked directly at Sarah. You survived. This is rare. Sarah nodded, her hand rising unconsciously to touch the scars on her face. Everyone else in my family died, the whole settlement almost. And now they fear you, Nijoni said. Her words a statement rather than a question. Yes, Sarah whispered. They think I carry death with me. Nijoni ladled stew into a clay bowl and handed it to Sarah. They are wrong. You carry life, strong life, that fought the sickness and won. Sarah accepted the bowl, her fingers trembling slightly at Nijoni's words. No one had ever suggested her survival might be something other than a curse. Eat, Nijoni instructed, then rest. Tomorrow's journey will not be easy. The stew was unlike anything Sarah had tasted before, rich with unfamiliar flavors that warmed her from the inside out. As she ate, Nijoni moved around the hogan, sorting herbs and mixing preparations in small clay pots. There was something mesmerizing about her movements, economic and purposeful. Why did you leave your people? Nijoni asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Sarah set down her empty bowl. I told you they all died. Not all white settlers died of the spotted sickness, Nijoni countered. Others would have come, built new homes, planted new fields. They drove me away, Sarah admitted, the memory still raw. Called me a witch, said my survival was unnatural. One man, Jeremiah Holt, our preacher, said God had marked me as cursed, like Cain. Nijoni made a sound of understanding. They feared what they could not explain. I had nowhere else to go, Sarah continued, the words spilling out now. Every settlement I approached, it was the same. Fear, then hatred. Some shot at me, others set dogs on me. So you came north toward native lands, Nijoni said. Thinking what? That we would welcome you? The question wasn't accusatory, but it made Sarah uncomfortable nonetheless. I didn't think beyond escape. I just needed to find somewhere I could exist without being hunted. Nijoni nodded slowly. And now you journey to Copper Ridge, hoping this leader will see beyond your scars. Yes, Sarah said, though doubt colored her voice. Emily, his sister, she was kind to me. She said he might give me a chance. Emily Watson, Nijoni said, surprising Sarah with her knowledge. A good woman with a good heart. Her brother Thomas is different. Sarah's heart sank. You know him? I know of him, Nijoni clarified. Copper Ridge sits on land that once belonged to my people. Thomas Richardson came with others, built their homes, claimed the land. When sickness came, not your spotted sickness, but another fever. Some sought my help, I healed those I could. And Richardson, Sarah asked, sensing there was more to the story. Nijoni's expression hardened slightly. He called my medicine witchcraft, forbade his people from seeking my help. Later, when the blue coats came looking for Navajo to force onto the reservation, he told them where to find many of my people who were hiding. Sarah's eyes widened. And yet you still live so close to his settlement. This is my home, Nijoni said simply. These mountains, these forests, they know me, and I know them. No paper signed in Washington makes them less mine. A log in. The fire collapsed, sending sparks upward through the smoke hole. In the sudden flare of light, Sarah noticed a collection of small pouches hanging from one of the support beams. Following her gaze, Nijoni said, medicine pouches, for different ailments, different needs. Do you have one for... Sarah gestured to her scarred face, immediately regretting the question. I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask. Your knowledge is your own. To her surprise, Nijoni smiled. The marks are part of your story now, Sarah Miller. They tell of your strength, your survival. But yes, there are preparations that can soften scars, make them less angry with time. Hope flickered. In Sarah's chest quickly tamped down. I wouldn't ask for such a gift. You've already saved my life and given me shelter. Nijoni studied her for a long moment. Sleep now. Morning brings new paths. She showed Sarah to a sleeping mat on one side of the hogan, providing a thick, woven blanket that smelled of cedar and sage. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, Sarah fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. She woke to the sound of soft singing. Opening her eyes, Sarah saw Nijoni kneeling by the fire, which had burned down to glowing embers. The healer was grinding something in a stone mortar, her voice rising and falling in a melody that seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. Sarah remained still, not wanting to interrupt what appeared to be a ritual of some kind. As Nijoni continued to work, adding different herbs to the mortar and grinding them together, Sarah noticed the sky visible through the smoke hole was beginning to lighten with dawn. Finally, Nijoni stopped singing and looked up, meeting Sarah's gaze directly. You are awake. Good. We have much to do before you continue your journey. Sarah sat up, folding the blanket carefully. Thank you for the shelter. I should be on my way soon if I want to reach Copper Ridge by nightfall. Nijoni arose fluidly for a woman of her years. First, we must prepare you. She approached with the stone mortar, which now contained a paste of deep green color, flecked with other elements Sarah couldn't identify. This is for healing, Nijoni explained, sitting cross-legged beside Sarah. It will cool the anger in your scars, make them less painful. Sarah was startled. How did you know they still hurt? Nijoni's smile was knowing. The body remembers its battles. Your scars are still new, still fighting. This will help them make peace with your skin. She dipped her fingers into the paste and with gentle movements began to apply it to Sarah's face. The mixture felt cool against Sarah's skin, with a tingling sensation that was not unpleasant. The settlers at Copper Ridge, Nijoni said as she worked. They will not all be like Emily Watson. Some will see your scars and fear you, no matter what letter you carry. Sarah closed her eyes, partly to avoid the paste, but mostly to hide her disappointment. Then what hope do I have? Where can I go? Nijoni's hands paused in their work. That depends on what you seek, Sarah Miller. A place to hide or a place to heal? A place to be tolerated or a place to be valued? The questions struck Sarah deeply. She had been focused only on survival for so long that she hadn't considered what kind of life she was fighting to preserve. I want, she began, then faltered. I want to live without fear. I want to be useful. I want to belong somewhere. Nijoni resumed applying the paste. Then Copper Ridge may not be what you seek, but you must discover this for yourself. When she had finished, Nijoni handed Sarah a small clay pot sealed with beeswax. Take this, apply it morning and night. It will continue the healing. Sarah accepted the pot with trembling hands. I have nothing to give you in return. Not all gifts require payment, Nijoni replied, rising to her feet. Come, eat, then I will show you the quickest path to Copper Ridge. They shared a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge sweetened with dried berries. As they ate, Nijoni spoke of the land, which plants could heal, which could harm, where to find water in dry seasons, how to read the weather in the shapes of clouds. Sarah listened intently, storing away knowledge that might mean the difference between life and death in this unfamiliar wilderness. Despite the shortness of their acquaintance, she felt a connection to this solitary healer that transcended words. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, they stepped outside the hogan. Nijoni pointed to a ridge in the distance. Follow that line of rocks. When you reach the tall pine that stands alone, turn toward the setting sun. Before dusk, you will see smoke from Copper Ridge chimneys. Sarah adjusted her pack and the blue bonnet Emily had given her. Thank you, Nijoni, for everything. Nijoni studied her for a moment, then reached into a pouch at her waist. She withdrew a small object and pressed it into Sarah's palm. Take this also. It may serve you when words fail. Sarah opened her hand to find a smooth stone pendant on a leather cord. The stone was a deep turquoise blue with veins of copper running through it. It is protection, Nijoni explained, and a reminder that paths that diverge may converge again. Sarah slipped the pendant over her head, feeling its weight settle against her chest beside her family locket. Will I see you again? Nijoni's smile was enigmatic. The mountains are smaller than they appear, Sarah Miller. Now go, find what you seek. With a heart both lighter and heavier than when she had entered the forest, Sarah began her journey toward Copper Ridge, unaware that her greatest challenges and most important choices still lay ahead. The path to Copper Ridge proved more challenging than Nijoni had suggested. As Sarah crested another steep hill, her legs aching from exertion, she caught sight of dark clouds gathering over the distant mountains. The wind had shifted, carrying a chill that cut through her worn clothing and whispered promises of early snow. Sarah touched the turquoise pendant hanging alongside her family locket, drawing comfort from both tokens as she pressed forward. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall, gentle at first, then increasing in intensity as the wind picked up. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter and adjusted Emily's bonnet, grateful for the small protection it offered against the worsening weather. The landmarks Nijoni had described were becoming harder to distinguish as the landscape transformed under a growing blanket of white. Sarah paused beside a lightning-struck pine tree, trying to get her bearings. The solitary tall pine Nijoni had mentioned should be visible from here, but the thickening snowfall obscured her vision beyond a few hundred yards. Doubt crept in, along with the biting cold. Had she already passed the landmark? Taken a wrong turn? The snow was falling faster now, the wind driving it sideways in stinging sheets. Sarah knew she needed to find shelter soon. Night would come early under these storm clouds, and freezing to death was a real possibility. She surveyed her surroundings, looking for anything that might offer protection from the elements. A dark shape in the distance caught her attention, too angular to be natural. Squinting through the snow, Sarah made out what appeared to be an abandoned cabin huddled against the hillside. Hope flaring in her chest, she moved toward it as quickly as the deepening snow would allow. The cabin was in poor repair, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges, one window broken and covered with a rotting piece of canvas. But the roof seemed mostly intact, and the stone chimney suggested the possibility of fire. Sarah pushed the door open, wincing at the protesting creak of metal. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, but blessedly free from the howling wind. Sarah's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim interior, revealing an old potbelly stove, a crude table with a single chair, and what had once been a bed frame, but was now just a sagging platform in the corner. A quick inspection of the stove showed it to be serviceable. Better yet, a small stack of firewood remained beside it, left by some previous occupant. Using flint and steel from her pack, one of Emily's thoughtful provisions, Sarah soon had a small fire burning in the stove. The warmth spread slowly through the cabin's single room, and Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief. Outside, the storm intensified, snow piling against the north wall of the cabin, while wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Sarah gathered what kindling she could find inside the cabin, knowing she would need to conserve the precious firewood to last. Through the night, as she moved about the small space, she discovered a few forgotten items. a dented tin cup, a folded oilskin coat too large for her frame but potentially useful, and beneath the bed frame, a wooden box. Curious, Sarah pulled the box into the stove's warm glow. It was sturdy, built to last, with a simple metal latch. Inside, she found a journal bound in faded leather, its pages yellowed but legible. The handwriting was cramped but clear, the entries dated 3 years earlier. Sarah settled near the stove, the journal open in her lap. The writer identified himself as James Donovan, a prospector who had built the cabin while searching for copper in the surrounding hills. His entries described months of fruitless searching, dwindling supplies, and increasing desperation. The final entry was dated December 18, 1865. Snow came early again, too weak to continue. We'll try for Copper Ridge tomorrow. If anyone finds this, tell Mary Donovan of Boston her brother died thinking of her. Sarah closed the journal gently, suddenly aware she might be sheltering in a dead man's home. Had James Donovan made it to Copper Ridge, or had he perished in a storm like this one? The journal offered no answers, only a grim reminder of the wilderness's indifference to human suffering. As darkness fell, Sarah made a simple meal from her provisions, watching the fire's glow reflect off the cabin's rough-hewn walls. The wind's mournful keen through the broken window played counterpoint to her thoughts of Nijoni and the strange circumstances of their meeting. The Navajo woman's quiet strength and wisdom had affected Sarah deeply in their brief time together. Sarah removed the clay pot of medicine from her pack and applied it to her scarred face, as Nijoni had instructed. The cooling sensation was immediate, easing the tightness and persistent itch that had plagued her since her recovery. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a fragile hope taking root. Perhaps there was more to her survival than mere chance or divine punishment. As Jeremiah Holt had claimed, a sudden crash from outside startled Sarah from her reflections. She froze, listening intently. The sound came again, something heavy striking the side of the cabin, followed by a low, rumbling groan that was distinctly human. Sarah reached for her small knife, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" she called, her voice surprisingly steady. No answer came, only another thud against the cabin wall, weaker this time. Sarah hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the possibility that someone was in distress. The memory of Emily's kindness and Nijoni's healing touched her conscience. Could she turn away from another human being in need when she herself had been shown mercy? Steeling herself, Sarah wrapped the oversized oilskin coat around her shoulders and pushed open the cabin door. The snow was nearly knee-deep now, the wind a living thing that clawed at her face and tried to push her back inside. Shielding her eyes, she peered into the swirling whiteness. A dark shape lay crumpled against the cabin wall, a person half buried in the drifting snow. With a surge of alarm, Sarah waded through the snow and knelt beside the figure. It was a man dressed in layers of ragged clothing, his hat gone and his graying hair crusted with ice. His face was deathly pale, lips blue from cold. "Can you hear me?" Sarah asked, touching his shoulder. His only response was a faint groan. Sarah made a quick decision. Grasping him beneath the arms, she began the laborious process of dragging him toward the cabin door. He was heavy, his body dead weight against her straining muscles. Inch by painful inch, she maneuvered him inside, finally managing to close the door against the relentless storm. In the stove's light, Sarah could see her unexpected guest more clearly. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 50, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. A prospector or trapper, most likely. A badly healed break had left one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, explaining his difficulty in the deep snow. The man's clothing was soaked through, his breathing shallow and labored. Sarah knew from bitter experience in Willow Creek that cold could kill as surely as any disease. She needed to warm him quickly. Pushing aside her initial discomfort, Sarah set to work removing his wet outer garments. As she pulled off his coat, something tumbled from an inner pocket, a small leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. Sarah set it aside without opening it. The man's wealth was none of her concern. Once she had him wrapped in the driest blankets she could find, Sarah positioned him near the stove and added more wood to the fire. His skin remained alarmingly cold to the touch, his breathing uneven. Remembering something her mother had taught her about treating exposure to cold, Sarah heated water in the dented tin cup, and once it was warm but not hot, helped the semi-conscious man drink small sips. Throughout the night, Sarah kept vigil. The storm raged unabated outside, the wind finding new ways to infiltrate the cabin's inadequate defenses. Every hour, Sarah checked on her patient, coaxing him to drink when he was coherent enough, monitoring his slow return to normal temperature. Near dawn, the man's eyes opened fully for the first time, pale blue eyes sharp with intelligence despite his weakened state. He stared at Sarah for a long moment, his gaze inevitably fixing on her scarred face. "You're real then," he said, his voice raspy. "Thought you might be a fever dream." "I'm real," Sarah confirmed, offering him water. "I found you half frozen against the cabin wall." He drank deeply before speaking again. "Jeremiah Holt. Lucky you came along when you did." Sarah nearly dropped the cup, shock coursing through her. "Jeremiah Holt from Willow Creek?" The man's eyes narrowed, reassessing her. "You know the place?" Sarah's throat tightened. This couldn't be coincidence. Jeremiah Holt had been Willow Creek's preacher, the very man who had denounced her as cursed, who had led the effort to drive her from the settlement after the smallpox had run its course. "I'm Sarah Miller," she said, watching his face closely. "William Miller's daughter." Recognition dawned slowly in Holt's eyes, followed by a flicker of fear quickly disguised. "Sarah Miller," he repeated. "They said you died with the others." "Not quite," Sarah replied, her voice cool, though many wished I had. Holt had the grace to look uncomfortable. He struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as he moved his twisted leg. "What are you doing out here? Thought you'd gone east." "East, west, north. I went wherever people weren't trying to shoot me on sight," Sarah said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Which direction did you suggest they drive me, preacher? I don't recall. There was so much shouting that day." Holt looked away, silent for a long moment. "I did what I thought was right. People were scared. The sickness had taken so many. It took my entire family," Sarah cut in. "I watched them die one by one. Then I survived only to be treated like a monster by people who'd known me my whole life. People who came to my father's forge, who ate at our table." She stood, abruptly moving away from him. "People who claimed to serve a God of mercy. The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the diminishing howl of the wind outside. The storm was passing, leaving in its wake an equally heavy silence. Holt shifted uncomfortably. "What will you do with me?" he asked finally, his voice smaller than before. The question caught Sarah off guard. "Do with you? We're alone here, I'm weakened. You have every reason to want revenge." His eyes met hers, searching. "Will you leave me to die, as you believe I did to you?" Sarah stared at him, momentarily speechless. The thought hadn't even occurred to her. Despite everything, she had never considered abandoning another human being to the mercy of the elements, not even Jeremiah Holt. "I'm not you," she said at last. "When the storm clears, we'll both continue on our way. I'm bound for Copper Ridge." Holt's expression changed. "Copper Ridge? Why there?" "I have a letter for Thomas Richardson from his sister Emily. She thought he might help me find work, a place to stay." Holt laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Richardson won't help you. One look at those scars, and he'll run you out same as Willow Creek did." Sarah's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "You know him?" "Known him for years. That's where I was headed when the storm caught me." Holt gestured toward the leather pouch Sarah had set aside. Got a business proposition for him. Man's always looking for new investments. Sarah added wood to the stove, using the task to hide her disappointment. Emily's letter suddenly seemed a flimsy protection against the reality Holt described. If Thomas Richardson was cut from the same cloth as the preacher, her reception at Copper Ridge would be no different from anywhere else. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked, changing the subject. "What happened to your leg?" Holt grimaced. "Broke it falling down a mine shaft 2 years back. Never healed right." He paused, something like shame crossing his weathered features. "After what happened at Willow Creek, after the sickness, people started saying I'd brought God's judgment on them with false teaching. Said if I was truly a man of God, the disease wouldn't have come." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. "So they turned on you the same way you turned on me?" Holt nodded reluctantly. "Left in the night. Been drifting since, doing odd jobs, a little prospecting. Heard Richardson was looking for men who know scripture. Thought maybe." He trailed off, and Sarah didn't press him. Instead, she moved to the cabin's single window and wiped away the condensation. Outside, the world was transformed. Snow lay thick on the ground, pristine and blinding in the morning light. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptively peaceful landscape. "Storm's over," she announced, "but the snow's deep. It'll make travel difficult, especially with your leg." Holt followed her gaze. "Richardson isn't expecting me. I can wait a day or two for some of this to melt." He hesitated, then added, "You could wait too. We could travel together." At Sarah's skeptical look, he continued, "Two have a better chance than one out here, and I know the way to Copper Ridge." Sarah considered him carefully. Traveling with Jeremiah Holt was the last thing she would have chosen. Yet there was undeniable logic in his proposal. His knowledge of the route would be valuable, and despite his past actions, he was in no condition to threaten her now. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. "You called me cursed, said I was marked by God's wrath." Holt had the decency to look ashamed. "I was wrong," he said simply, "not about the Bible's teachings, but about you. If God spared you alone from the sickness, perhaps it was mercy, not wrath." Sarah wasn't sure she believed his change of heart, but the practical advantages of traveling together were undeniable. "We'll leave tomorrow," she decided, "if the snow's begun to melt." That night they shared a meager supper of Sarah's remaining provisions. The silence between them was charged with unspoken history, but not entirely hostile. As they ate, Holt kept glancing at her face, his expression puzzled. "Your scars," he said finally. "They look different than I remember, less severe." Sarah's hand rose automatically to her cheek. "I met a Navajo healer. She gave me medicine for them." Holt's eyebrows rose. "You trusted Indian medicine? After what you survived?" "She helped me when no one else would," Sarah replied sharply. "She saw my scars as a sign of strength, not God's punishment." Holt was silent for a moment. "Perhaps she was right," he said quietly. The next morning dawned clear and cold. As Sarah had hoped, the bright sun had already begun to soften the snow's surface. After a breakfast of the last of her bread, they prepared to depart. Sarah carefully packed Nijoni's medicine pot, Donovan's journal, and Emily's letter. Holt gathered his few belongings, including the leather pouch of coins. "It's about a day's journey to Copper Ridge in good weather," Holt explained as they stepped outside. "With the snow in my leg, might take 2. They set off at a careful pace, Holt leading the way with the aid of a sturdy branch he'd fashioned into a walking stick. The going was slow, the deep snow making each step laborious. By midday, they had covered less ground than Sarah would have liked, and Holt was clearly struggling, his face gray with exhaustion and pain. "We should rest," Sarah suggested, indicating a fallen log partially cleared of snow. Holt didn't argue, lowering himself onto the log with a barely suppressed groan. As he massaged his twisted leg, Sarah surveyed their surroundings. The forest had thinned, giving way to rolling hills covered in snow. In the distance, she thought she could make out thin columns of smoke rising against the blue sky, perhaps chimneys from Copper Ridge. "Tell me about Thomas Richardson," Sarah said, turning back to Holt. "What kind of man is he?" Holt considered the question. Hard but fair in his way. Built Copper Ridge from nothing. Folks there respect him, follow his lead without question. He paused. He's got strong views on how things should be. Doesn't tolerate much that falls outside those views. "Including people with smallpox scars?" Sarah asked directly. Holt's hesitation was answer enough. Richardson lost his first wife and 2 children to a fever. Makes him cautious about sickness. Sarah's heart sank. Emily's letter seemed increasingly insufficient protection against such deeply rooted fear. Perhaps Copper Ridge isn't where I should be heading after all. "Where else would you go?" Holt asked reasonably. "Winter's coming. You need shelter, work." Before Sarah could respond, a sound caught her attention. Voices, carrying through the clear air, accompanied by the jingle of harnesses and creak of wagon wheels. Holt heard it too, his head turning toward the noise. "Someone's coming," he said, pushing himself to his feet. Around the bend in the crude trail emerged a wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses. A man and woman sat on the driver's bench, bundled, against the cold. As they spotted Sarah and Holt, the man drew the horses to a halt. "Travelers," he called out, "you headed for Copper Ridge?" Holt stepped forward, leaning heavily on his makeshift cane. "We are. I'm Jeremiah Holt. This is Sarah Miller." The man nodded in greeting. "Jacob Turner. This is my wife Rebecca. We're bringing supplies from Fort Collins." His gaze lingered briefly on Sarah's scarred face before moving to Holt's twisted leg. "Looks like you 2 could use a ride. Climb. Aboard." Sarah hesitated, surprised by the offer. Rebecca Turner noticed her uncertainty and smiled warmly. "Please join us," she said. "The snow makes for slow going on foot." With a grateful nod, Sarah and Holt approached the wagon. Jacob helped Holt climb onto the bench beside him, while Sarah settled in the wagon bed among crates and sacks of goods. As the wagon lurched forward, Rebecca turned to study Sarah more carefully. She was younger than Sarah had first thought, perhaps only a few years older than Sarah herself, with kind brown eyes and hair tucked neatly beneath a woolen bonnet. "Those are smallpox scars," Rebecca said quietly, her direct approach catching Sarah off guard. "Yes," Sarah admitted, tensing for the familiar reaction of fear and rejection. Instead, Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "My brother had them too. Not as extensive as yours, but he survived an outbreak in Virginia during the war." She gestured to her left ear, which Sarah now noticed was subtly malformed. "I was born this way. Makes people uncomfortable sometimes. They think it means something about who I am inside." The simple understanding in Rebecca's words loosened, something tight in Sarah's chest. "Where is your brother now?" "Gone," Rebecca said simply. "Not from the smallpox. That couldn't kill him. But a horse throwing him 2 years later did the job just fine." She smiled sadly. "Life's strange that way." From the driver's bench, Jacob and Holt had fallen into conversation about conditions at Copper Ridge and the latest news from Fort Collins. Sarah caught fragments about new settlers arriving and tensions with native tribes further north. "Your husband seems comfortable with strangers," Sarah observed. Rebecca laughed softly. "Jacob never met a person he couldn't talk to. It's why he handles the trading. I manage our store in Copper Ridge." She leaned closer. "What brings you to our settlement? Not many women travel alone in these parts." Sarah considered how much to reveal. "I'm hoping to find work. Maybe a fresh start. That's what most come looking for. Rebecca agreed. Where are you from originally? A settlement called Willow Creek south of here. It's gone now. Smallpox. Rebecca's expression sobered. I'm sorry. Was your family? All of them, Sarah confirmed, her hand rising to touch her locket. I'm the only one who survived. Rebecca reached out, briefly touching Sarah's hand, in sympathy. Copper Ridge is growing. We need people willing to work hard. What skills do you have? My father was a blacksmith. I helped him from the time I was small. I can cook, sew, tend animals. Sarah paused. I can read and write better than most. My mother taught school before she married. Interest sparked in Rebecca's eyes. We've been hoping to establish a proper school. Right now, the children receive lessons from Mrs. Abernathy 2 days a week, but she's getting on in years. She studied Sarah thoughtfully. Would teaching interest you? The question caught Sarah by surprise. Yes, it would, very much. But would parents allow their children to be taught by someone with... She gestured to her scarred face. Rebecca's expression turned determined. Some might object at first. People fear what they don't understand. But skills like yours are valuable, and practical necessity has a way of overcoming fear. She smiled. Besides, Jacob and I have some influence in town. His father was one of the original settlers, and my sister is married to Thomas Richardson's son. Sarah's eyes widened. Thomas Richardson? I have a letter for him from his sister Emily. Emily Watson? Rebecca looked pleased. We haven't seen her in Copper Ridge for nearly 2 years. How is she? She was kind to me, Sarah said simply. She thought her brother might help me find a place in Copper Ridge. Rebecca nodded. Thomas can be set in his ways, but he respects Emily's judgment. She glanced toward the driver's bench, where Jacob and Holt were still deep in conversation. Your companion knows Thomas. We've never traveled together before, Sarah clarified. We met by chance during the storm. He says he has business with Mr. Richardson. Rebecca studied Holt with quiet assessment. I see. Well, any friend of Emily's is welcome in our home. You'll stay with us tonight, and tomorrow we can introduce you to Thomas properly. The simple kindness of the offer brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me unload these supplies when we arrive, Rebecca replied with a smile. Jacob bought enough fabric and notions to stock 3 general stores. As the wagon continued its slow progress through the snow, Sarah found herself drawn into easy conversation with Rebecca. The woman's straightforward acceptance of Sarah's appearance and circumstances was a balm to her weary spirit. For the first time since leaving Najoni's Hogan, Sarah felt a cautious hope that Copper Ridge might indeed offer the fresh start she sought. By late afternoon, the settlement came into view. Copper Ridge was larger than Sarah had expected. At least 30 buildings arranged in a rough grid, with a central street leading to what appeared to be a church or meeting hall. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys, and despite the snow, people moved purposefully between buildings. As the wagon rolled into town, curious faces turned toward them. Sarah felt the familiar weight of stares, saw the subtle reactions as people noticed her scarred face, but mixed with the expected wariness, she caught glimpses of something else, simple curiosity rather than fear, and in some cases, a kind of weary acceptance. These were frontier people, accustomed to hardship and the marks it left. Jacob guided the wagon to a large building with a sign proclaiming Turner's General Store and Trading Post. As they came to a stop, he jumped down and extended a hand to help his wife. Home at last, he announced cheerfully. Let's get you. Folks inside where it's warm, then worry about unloading. The store was spacious and well-stocked, with a pot-bellied stove radiating welcome heat. Jacob helped Holt to a chair near the stove, while Rebecca showed Sarah to a back room that served as their living quarters. "It's not fancy," Rebecca apologized, indicating a small bedroom off the main living area. "But it's clean and private. You can wash up here." She set a pitcher of water and a basin on a small table. "I'll have Jacob bring your things." Left alone, Sarah took advantage of the opportunity to wash away the grime of travel. As she dried her face, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. The change in her scars was subtle but unmistakable. Nijoni's medicine had already begun to soften their angry red appearance, making them less pronounced against her fair skin. Sarah touched her face wonderingly. The physical transformation was minor, but its effect on her spirit was profound. For the first time since the smallpox, she looked at her reflection without flinching. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah," Rebecca called, "there's hot food when you're ready." The main room of the Turners' living quarters was warm and inviting, dominated by a large table where Jacob was already serving stew from a cast-iron pot. Holt sat at one end, his injured leg stretched out before him, looking more at ease than Sarah had yet seen him. "Sit, sit," Jacob insisted, gesturing to an empty chair. Rebecca's venison stew is famous throughout the territory. The meal was indeed delicious, the conversation surprisingly comfortable. Jacob shared news from Fort Collins, rumors of a new treaty with the northern tribes, plans for a proper road to connect the growing settlements in the territory, gossip about a gold strike that was drawing prospectors to the mountains west of them. "Is that what brings you to these parts, Mr. Holt?" Jacob asked. "Prospecting?" Holt shook his head. "Not anymore. My leg makes that kind of work impossible now. I'm hoping to offer my services to Thomas Richardson in a different capacity." "Oh?" Jacob looked interested. "What kind of services?" "I was a preacher before," Holt said, his voice carrying a hint of his former authority. "Copper Ridge has grown large enough to need spiritual guidance, I'd wager." Jacob exchanged a quick glance with his wife. "We have services every Sunday in the meeting hall. Different men take turns leading, Richardson most often, but others step in." "A settled preacher would bring stability," Holt pressed. "Structure for the young people, comfort for the sick and dying." Sarah watched the exchange with interest, noting how quickly Holt had reverted to his role as spiritual authority. Had his humility in the cabin been genuine, or merely a temporary concession to necessity? That would be for Thomas to decide. Jacob said diplomatically, "I'll introduce you tomorrow. He usually comes by the store after breakfast." As the meal concluded, Rebecca began clearing the dishes. Sarah rose to help, grateful for something useful to do. As they worked together in the small kitchen area, Rebecca spoke quietly. "Your friend seems very determined to establish himself here." "He's not my friend," Sarah corrected gently. "We were thrown together by circumstance." Rebecca nodded, accepting this. "His type is common enough in frontier settlements, men who lost their place in the world they knew, trying to rebuild something similar in new territory." She glanced toward the main room, where Jacob and Holt were still talking. "Some succeed, others never quite find their footing again. Which do you think Holt will be?" Sarah asked, curious about Rebecca's assessment. Rebecca considered the question as she dried a plate. "That depends on Thomas, I suppose, and on whether your Mr. Holt has truly learned from his past or merely wishes to recreate it." The insight struck Sarah forcefully. Was that not the essential question she faced as well? Was she seeking to rebuild something like her old life in Willow Creek, or was she ready to create something entirely new? As darkness fell over Copper Ridge, Sarah found herself drawn to the store's front window. The settlement's main street was illuminated by lanterns hanging outside the larger buildings, creating pools of golden light in the snowy darkness. People moved between these circles of light. Men returning from work, women carrying baskets, or children, the ordinary rhythms of community continuing despite the harsh environment. Sarah touched the turquoise pendant Nijoni had given her, its smooth surface cool against her fingers. Tomorrow, she would meet Thomas Richardson, present, Emily's letter, and discover whether Copper Ridge would welcome or reject her. But tonight, watching the life of the settlement unfold before her, she allowed herself to imagine belonging to such a community again. Behind her, the Turners' home hummed with the simple activities of evening, Jacob checking his ledgers, Rebecca mending by lamplight, even Holt contributing to the domestic peace as he whittled a piece of wood with a small knife. The scene stirred memories of Sarah's own family evenings before the smallpox had destroyed everything familiar. For this moment at least, the wound in her heart felt less raw, as if Nijoni's healing extended beyond her physical scars to touch something deeper within. Whatever tomorrow might bring, Sarah realized she had already found something she thought lost forever, the possibility of hope. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Sarah woke to the sounds of the Turners, moving about their home, the clatter of cookware and murmur of conversation forming a domestic symphony she had almost forgotten. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the simple luxury of a warm bed and the promise of a day that might not be consumed by mere survival. When she finally rose and dressed, Sarah took extra care, applying Nijoni's medicine to her face. The cooling sensation had become familiar, almost comforting, a daily ritual connecting her to the Navajo healer who had shown her unexpected kindness. The clay pot was already half empty. Sarah would need to use it sparingly if she wanted it to last. In the main room, Rebecca was preparing breakfast while Jacob stoked the fire in the stove. Holt sat at the table, his grey hair neatly combed, wearing clean clothes that Jacob must have loaned him. He looked more like the preacher Sarah remembered from Willow Creek, composed, authoritative, sure of his place in the world. "Good morning," Rebecca greeted warmly. "I hope you slept well." Sarah nodded, accepting a cup of strong coffee. "Better than I have in months. Thank you again for your hospitality." "Thomas should be by within the hour," Jacob informed them, settling at the table. "He's predictable as sunrise. First the church, then the store, then the sawmill." Holt straightened his borrowed shirt. "Is there somewhere I might clean up a bit more? Want to make a proper impression?" Jacob directed him to a washroom while Rebecca served breakfast, cornbread with honey, bacon, and stewed apples. The simple meal was more abundant than anything Sarah had eaten since leaving Willow Creek, and she had to remind herself to eat, slowly, savoring each bite. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said as she joined them at the table. "If you're interested in teaching, Sarah, we should speak with Abigail Abernathy after you meet with Thomas. She's been asking for someone to take over the children's lessons." Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest. "Do you really think it's possible? With my—" She gestured to her scarred face. Rebecca's expression turned determined. "Copper Ridge needs a proper teacher more than it needs to indulge in foolish fears. Besides," she added with a smile, "the children will be curious at first, but they adapt quickly. It's often the parents who need more convincing." The bell above the store's front door jingled and Jacob rose. "That'll be early customers. I'll open up." He disappeared through the door connecting their living quarters to the store. Rebecca began clearing the table and Sarah moved to help her. "Tell me about Thomas Richardson," Sarah requested, keeping her voice low. "What should I expect?" Rebecca considered the question as she stacked plates. "Thomas is complicated. He helped found Copper Ridge when this was still raw wilderness, lost his first wife and 2 children to fever before they even had proper walls built." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That kind of loss shapes a person. Thomas became focused on order, on rules. He believes structure keeps people safe." "And those who don't fit within that structure?" Sarah asked. He tolerates less difference than some might wish, Rebecca admitted. But he's not cruel, just convinced of his way of seeing things. She smiled slightly. Emily was always the one person who could change his mind. If her letter endorses you, that will carry significant weight. The door connecting to the store opened, and Jacob leaned in. Thomas is here, he announced, and he's brought the pastor from Fort Collins with him. Rebecca's eyebrows rose in surprise. Pastor Williams? He wasn't expected until next month. Apparently he came early, Jacob replied. They're waiting in the store. Holt emerged from the washroom, his expression sharpening at this news. A pastor from Fort Collins? What denomination? Presbyterian, Jacob answered. He visits quarterly to perform marriages, baptisms and such. Good man, educated back east. Holt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sarah recognized the look, territorial concern from a man who had hoped to claim spiritual authority himself. Shall we? Rebecca prompted, gesturing toward the door. Sarah touched Emily's letter in her pocket, drawing courage from the connection to the one person who had shown her kindness without reservation. With a deep breath, she followed the others into the store. Thomas Richardson stood near the counter, deep in conversation with a younger man in a black coat. Richardson was tall and broad-shouldered despite his years, with a full white beard and piercing blue eyes that reminded Sarah immediately of Emily. The family resemblance was strong, though where Emily's features had been softened by compassion, her brother's face spoke of unyielding conviction. Jacob made the introductions. Thomas, Pastor Williams, these are the travelers I mentioned. Sarah Miller and Jeremiah Holt. They arrived yesterday during the storm. Richardson's gaze swept over them both, lingering briefly on Sarah's scarred face before returning to Holt. Welcome to Copper Ridge, he said, his voice deep and authoritative. Jacob says you're looking to settle here. Holt stepped forward, hand extended. Jeremiah Holt, formerly of Willow Creek. I was the spiritual leader there before. He hesitated. Before misfortune befell the settlement. Richardson shook his hand firmly. Willow Creek? I heard smallpox hit that area hard last spring. It did, Holt confirmed, a shadow crossing his face. We lost many good people. Pastor Williams, a slender man with kind eyes and a scholarly bearing, turned his attention to Sarah. And you, Miss Miller? Were you from Willow Creek as well? Sarah nodded, gathering her courage. Yes, sir. I have a letter for Mr. Richardson from his sister, Emily Watson. She withdrew the folded paper from her pocket and extended it toward Richardson. A flicker of surprise crossed his stern features. From Emily? He accepted the letter, breaking the wax seal with a thick finger. His eyes moved rapidly across the page, his expression unreadable. The store had grown quiet, other customers pausing in their business to observe the interaction. Sarah felt the weight of curious stares, the too familiar assessment of her scarred face. She kept her back straight, her gaze steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. Finally, Richardson refolded the letter. Emily speaks highly of you, he said, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. Says you survived the smallpox that took your family, that you're educated and seeking honest work. That's correct, sir, Sarah confirmed. Richardson studied her for a long moment. Emily has always had a soft heart for strays and unfortunates, but she's also an excellent judge of character. He glanced at Rebecca. Mrs. Turner mentioned, you might have skills as a teacher. My mother taught school before her marriage, Sarah explained. She educated me at home, and I assisted with younger children in Willow Creek. Pastor Williams looked interested. Copper Ridge has been discussing the need for a proper school for some time. The children here would benefit from structured education. Holt cleared his throat. If I might speak, Mr. Richardson. I knew Sarah and her family in Willow Creek. The Millers were respectable, God-fearing people. Sarah would make an excellent teacher, but there's the matter of He gestured vaguely toward her face. Sarah stiffened. After their conversations in the cabin, she hadn't expected Holt to be the one to raise objections to her appearance. Richardson's eyes narrowed. The matter of what, exactly? Holt spread his hands in a placating gesture. Some parents might be concerned. The scars are a visible reminder of a terrible disease. People are naturally cautious about such things. The disease is long gone, Sarah said firmly, finding her voice. The scars are merely marks of survival, not contagion. Pastor Williams nodded. Indeed, medical science has established that survivors of smallpox pose no threat to those around them. In fact, they often demonstrate remarkable resistance to other illnesses as well. Richardson stroked his beard thoughtfully. My sister's judgment carries weight with me, Miss Miller, and we do need a teacher. He turned to Rebecca. Take her to meet Mrs. Abernathy this afternoon. If the old woman approves, we can discuss arrangements for the school. Relief flooded through Sarah. It wasn't absolute acceptance, but it was more than she had dared hope for. Richardson turned his attention to Holt. As for you, Mr. Holt, what brings you to Copper Ridge? Besides escorting Miss Miller, that is. I seek an opportunity to serve, Holt replied smoothly. I was a preacher for 15 years in Willow Creek. With your settlement growing, I thought perhaps there might be need for spiritual guidance. Pastor Williams and Richardson exchanged a glance. We currently share pastoral duties among several men in the community, Richardson explained. Pastor Williams visits quarterly for the sacraments. A permanent spiritual presence would benefit the community, Holt persisted. Daily guidance, not just Sunday sermons and occasional visits. Richardson's expression remained neutral. An interesting proposal. We'll discuss it further at the town council meeting tomorrow. He turned back to Sarah. Miss Miller, there's a small cabin at the edge of town, previously used by the school teacher who moved on last fall. It needs work, but it's yours if you want it. Thank you, Sarah said, somewhat dazed by this sudden turn of fortune. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Don't thank me yet, Richardson cautioned. Some here will question my decision. You'll need to prove your worth. He nodded curtly to the group. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business at the sawmill. As Richardson departed, the tension in the store eased. Pastor Williams smiled warmly at Sarah. I look forward to seeing the school develop under your guidance, Miss Miller. Education is essential on the frontier, perhaps even more so than in established communities. Sarah returned his smile, liking the gentle-mannered pastor immediately. I'll do my best to serve the children well. I'm sure you will. He turned to Holt. Mr. Holt, perhaps you'd join me for coffee later. I'd be interested to hear about your experiences in Willow Creek. Holt agreed readily, clearly pleased to have the pastor's attention. As the men continued talking, Rebecca guided Sarah toward the rear of the store. That went better than expected, she said quietly. Thomas isn't easy to convince, but Emily's word carries weight with him. I noticed Mr. Holt seemed eager to remind everyone of my scars, Sarah observed, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Rebecca sighed. Men like Holt are skilled at positioning themselves as necessary intermediaries between people and their fears. By highlighting your difference, he creates a problem he can then offer to manage. She shook her head. I've seen the type before. They thrive on being needed. The insight struck Sarah as profoundly true. In Willow Creek, Holt had cultivated his position as spiritual authority, partly by identifying and magnifying threats, both real and imagined, that only proper faith could protect against. Come, Rebecca said, changing the subject. Let me show you the cabin Thomas mentioned. We can fetch your things from our home on the way. The cabin stood at the eastern edge of Copper Ridge, a simple one-room structure with a stone chimney and a front porch sagging with age. The windows were intact but coated with grime, and the door stuck as Rebecca pushed it open. Inside, dust covered every surface. A small iron stove sat cold in one corner, a narrow bed frame in another. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs occupied. The center of the room and shelves lined one wall, empty save for a few forgotten books. "It needs work," Rebecca acknowledged. "But the roof doesn't leak, and the chimney draws well. Jacob can help repair the porch this weekend." Sarah stepped further into the space, seeing not its current shabbiness, but its potential. A home of her own, however humble. After months of wandering, of sleeping in barns and under open skies, the simple security of 4 walls and a door that closed felt like unimaginable luxury. "It's perfect," she said softly. Rebecca smiled. "Let's open these windows and air it out. I have spare blankets and cooking pots you can use until you get settled." As they worked to make the cabin habitable, Sarah found herself thinking of Nijoni. The Navajo woman had created a home of profound peace in the wilderness, a space that reflected her spirit and purpose. Perhaps this small cabin could become something similar for Sarah, not just shelter, but a place of healing and new beginnings. By mid-afternoon, the cabin had been swept and scrubbed, the windows cleaned to allow pale sunlight to stream across the wooden floor. Jacob arrived with a wagon containing the promised blankets, pots, and other essentials, along with firewood for the stove. "It's not much," he apologized, surveying the sparse furnishings. "It's more than I've had in months," Sarah assured him. "I don't know how to thank you both for your kindness." Rebecca waved away her gratitude. "Neighbors help. Neighbors here. It's how we survive." She checked the position of the sun through the window. "We should go see Abigail Abernathy now while there's still daylight." They found Mrs. Abernathy in a comfortable house near the meeting hall. Despite Rebecca's warning that the elderly teacher could be particular, Sarah took an immediate liking to the sharp-eyed woman who evaluated her with unabashed directness. "So you want to teach our children?" Mrs. Abernathy said, peering at Sarah over wire-rimmed spectacles. "What qualifies you for such responsibility?" Sarah straightened. "Under the scrutiny. I was educated by my mother, who taught school in Boston before her marriage. I can read and write, do figures, and have knowledge of history, geography, and natural philosophy." "Can you maintain discipline? Children can be merciless, especially to those they perceive as different." The older woman's gaze moved purposefully to Sarah's scarred face. "I believe children respond to clear expectations and genuine respect," Sarah replied. "As for my appearance, I would address it directly rather than pretend they don't notice. Curiosity is natural. Fear comes from ignorance." Mrs. Abernathy's stern expression softened slightly. "A sensible approach. What books did you use in your own education?" For the next hour, Sarah found herself engaged in a thorough examination of her knowledge and teaching philosophy. Mrs. Abernathy's questions were pointed but fair, her manner becoming increasingly approving as Sarah demonstrated her capabilities. "Well," the older woman said finally, "you know your subjects better than I expected. The children currently meet in the back room of the meeting hall Tuesday through Friday. There are 17 of them, ages 5 to 14, with widely varying levels of previous instruction." "When would you like me to start?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Abernathy smiled for the first time. "Tomorrow. I've waited too long for someone competent to take over. My arthritis makes writing on the slate an agony these days." She rose stiffly. "Come back in the morning and I'll introduce you to the children. After that, they're your responsibility." As they walked back toward the center of town, Rebecca looked pleased. "Abigail doesn't impress easily. You've cleared your first hurdle. Now I just need to convince the parents," Sarah said, apprehension mixing with her excitement. "That's why starting tomorrow is perfect," Rebecca pointed out. "The children..." We'll meet you with Mrs. Abernathy's endorsement before their parents have time to object." The wisdom of this strategy was evident. Still, Sarah couldn't help wondering how many other hurdles awaited her. Thomas Richardson's conditional acceptance and Mrs. Abernathy's approval were significant steps, but Copper Ridge as a whole had yet to pass judgment on the scarred newcomer in their midst. As evening approached, Rebecca insisted Sarah join them for dinner again. "Your cabin isn't properly stocked." "Yet," she reasoned. "Besides, Thomas has called a special meeting tonight at the church. Everyone will be there, and it's a chance for people to meet you formally." The prospect of facing the entire settlement at once was daunting, but Sarah recognized the opportunity it presented. Better to meet her new neighbors in a controlled setting than to encounter their reactions piecemeal as she moved about town. Dusk was settling over Copper Ridge as they made their way to the meeting hall. Lanterns glowed in windows, and smoke curled from chimneys into the darkening sky. The hall itself, a large plain building with a modest steeple, was already filled with people when they arrived. Sarah entered beside Rebecca, conscious of the ripple of whispers that followed her progress down the aisle. Jacob had gone ahead and saved them seats near the front, where Holt was already positioned prominently, deep in conversation with Pastor Williams. Thomas Richardson stood at the front of the room, his commanding presence quieting the assembly. As he raised his hands, "Friends and neighbors," he began, his deep voice carrying to the farthest corners. "Thank you for coming on short notice. We have several matters to discuss tonight." He proceeded to address various community concerns: repairs needed for the bridge over Silver Creek, plans for winter food storage, a report of wolf sightings near the northern pastures. Sarah listened attentively, impressed by the orderly way Richardson managed the settlement's affairs. "Now," he continued after these items had been addressed, "I want to introduce two newcomers to Copper Ridge. They arrived yesterday, having traveled separately but meeting during the storm." All eyes turned towards Sarah and Holt. Richardson gestured for them to stand. "Jeremiah Holt comes to us from Willow Creek, where he served as preacher. Sarah Miller also hails from Willow Creek, where her father was the blacksmith. Miss Miller brings a letter of introduction from my sister, Emily Watson, and will be taking over teaching duties from Mrs. Abernathy, who has served us faithfully for 3 years." A murmur ran through the crowd. Near the back, a woman whispered loudly enough to be heard, "But look at her face, the smallpox." Richardson held up a hand, silencing the comment. "Miss Miller is a survivor of the smallpox that devastated Willow Creek. Pastor Williams assures me, and medical science confirms, that she presents no danger to our community. In fact, her experience may be valuable should illness visit us again." It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but Richardson's matter-of-fact tone helped normalize Sarah's presence. She nodded respectfully to the assembled townspeople before resuming her seat. Richardson continued, "Mr. Holt has expressed interest in serving Copper Ridge in a spiritual capacity. As you know, we currently share preaching duties among several men, with Pastor Williams visiting quarterly. The town council will consider Mr. Holt's proposal and make a recommendation." Holt stood again, clearly eager to address the gathering. Himself. "If I may, Mr. Richardson," he said, stepping forward without waiting for permission. "Good people of Copper Ridge, it's an honor to be among you. The Lord guides our paths in mysterious ways, and I believe he has led me here for a purpose." Sarah watched as Holt seamlessly adopted the cadences and mannerisms of the preacher she remembered from Willow Creek. Authoritative, persuasive, someone who positioned himself as a necessary intermediary between his congregation and divine understanding. "A community such as yours, growing in the wilderness, faces many challenges," Holt continued. "Physical dangers, yes, but also spiritual ones. The frontier attracts those seeking freedom, but freedom without guidance can lead to moral disorder." Several heads nodded in agreement. Richardson stood to the side, his expression unreadable as he allowed Holt to continue. "I offer my experience, my training in scripture, and my commitment to righteous living. Together, we can build not just a settlement of houses and shops, but a true community of faith that stands as a beacon in this territory." It was a compelling speech, delivered with practiced conviction. Sarah could see its effect on many faces. In the crowd, particularly the older settlers, those who had braved the early years of Copper Ridge's existence and now sought stability and order. Pastor Williams stepped forward as Holt concluded. "I've spoken at length with Mr. Holt today, and I believe his theological training is sound. Should the council decide to accept his offer of service, I would be pleased to continue my quarterly visits to support his ministry." This endorsement clearly pleased Holt. He bowed slightly to Williams before returning to his seat, satisfaction evident in the set of his shoulders. Richardson reclaimed control of the meeting. "We'll take the matter under advisement. Now, before we conclude, are there other issues requiring immediate attention?" A middle-aged woman near the middle of the hall stood. "Mr. Richardson, regarding the new teacher, my Eliza is 8 years old and impressionable. Will the council consider how the children might react to—" She gestured vaguely toward Sarah. Before Richardson could respond, Mrs. Abernathy rose from her seat near the front, her voice surprisingly strong for her years. "Martha Jenkins, your Eliza can barely write her own name after 3 years under my instruction. If you're more concerned about the teacher's face than your daughter's education, perhaps you should teach her yourself." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the assembly. Martha Jenkins flushed red, but remained standing. "It's not the education I question, Abigail. It's the fear the children might experience. Nightmares, distress." "Children fear what? Adults teach them to fear," Mrs. Abernathy cut in sharply. "I've spent the afternoon evaluating Miss Miller's qualifications, which are superior to any teacher we're likely to find in this territory. If you're concerned about nightmares, perhaps examine what stories you're telling at your own hearth." Richardson interjected before the exchange could escalate further. "Mrs. Abernathy's judgment in educational matters has served this community well. Miss Miller will begin teaching tomorrow. Parents with specific concerns may address them to me directly." His tone indicated the matter was closed. Martha Jenkins sat down, still frowning, but offered no further objection. As the meeting concluded, people began to disperse, many casting curious glances toward Sarah as they filed out. A few approached directly, introducing themselves with cautious politeness. Jacob and Rebecca remained protectively close, facilitating these introductions and smoothing awkward moments. Sarah was speaking with the blacksmith's wife, a conversation that stirred poignant memories of her father, when a young girl approached, staring openly at her scarred face. "Eliza!" Martha Jenkins hurried forward, grasping her daughter's shoulders. "Come along now." The child resisted. "But Mama, I want to ask her something." Sarah knelt to the girl's level, ignoring the mother's obvious discomfort. "What would you like to know, Eliza?" The girl studied Sarah's face with frank curiosity. "Did it hurt when you were sick?" "Eliza!" her mother exclaimed, mortified. Sarah smiled gently. "It's all right. Yes, it did hurt when I was sick. But I'm not sick anymore, and the marks don't hurt now. They're just reminders that I survived something difficult." Eliza considered this seriously. "Like the scar my brother has from when the horse kicked him." "Very similar," Sarah agreed, "just more of them." The girl nodded, apparently satisfied. "Will you teach us about maps? Mrs. Abernathy doesn't know maps very well." Sarah laughed softly. "Yes, we'll definitely learn about maps." "Martha," Jenkins pulled her daughter away, murmuring apologies, but Sarah noticed the woman's expression had softened slightly. The simple, direct curiosity of a child had accomplished what Richardson's authority and Mrs. Abernathy's endorsement could not. It had humanized her. As the hall emptied, Sarah found herself approached by a tall young man with Richardson's blue eyes but a gentler countenance. "Miss Miller," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Michael Richardson, Thomas's son. My wife Elizabeth is Rebecca's sister." Sarah shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard physical work. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Richardson. I'm the settlement's doctor," he explained. "Trained in Philadelphia before coming west with my father. I was wondering if you might permit me to speak with you sometime about your experience with smallpox. Survivors' accounts are valuable to medical understanding." The request surprised Sarah. "Of course, if you think it would be helpful." Michael smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Extremely helpful. Perhaps you could visit my office tomorrow after school concludes. It's just beside my home, near the western edge of town." Sarah agreed, touched by his professional interest in her experience rather than mere curiosity about her appearance. As Michael moved away to join his wife, a pretty woman who bore a clear resemblance to Rebecca, Sarah felt a growing sense that Copper Ridge might indeed offer the fresh start she had been seeking. Later, as she settled into her cabin for the first night, Sarah sat by the small stove Jacob had helped her light. The space was still spare, but Rebecca had provided enough essentials to make it comfortable. A kettle hummed on the stove, and fresh bread sat on the table alongside cheese and dried fruit. In the quiet, Sarah removed the silver locket containing the portrait of her family. She studied their faces in the firelight, her father's strong features, her mother's gentle smile, her brother Daniel's mischievous eyes. For the first time since their deaths, looking at them brought more comfort than pain. "I found a place," she whispered to the miniature. "Not home, not yet, but maybe someday." She closed the locket and then touched the turquoise pendant Nijoni had given her. The Navajo healer seemed far away now, but Sarah felt her influence nonetheless. Nijoni had seen strength where others saw only tragedy, had offered healing that went beyond physical scars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, facing the children, proving herself to skeptical parents, establishing her place in this community. But for tonight, in this small cabin that was hers alone, Sarah allowed herself to believe that the journey that had begun in loss might yet end in belonging. Dawn broke clear and cold over Copper Ridge, painting the small settlement in hues of gold and amber. Sarah stood before the single mirror in her cabin, applying Nijoni's medicine to her face with careful fingers. Today would be her first as the settlement's teacher, and despite her outward composure, anxiety fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. The medicine pot was noticeably lighter now, its contents diminishing with each application. Sarah wondered if she might find the ingredients to replicate it when it was gone. She had paid close attention to Nijoni's process, but the unfamiliar herbs and the healer's quiet chanting had seemed as much ritual as science. After a simple breakfast of bread and tea, Sarah gathered the few books she possessed and headed toward the meeting hall. The morning air was crisp, the ground hardened by overnight frost that crunched beneath her boots. A few early risers nodded cautiously as she passed, their gazes lingering on her scarred face before politely shifting away. The meeting hall stood empty when she arrived, its cavernous main room silent and dim. Following Rebecca's directions, Sarah made her way to a smaller room at the rear of the building. Here, rough benches faced a modest slate board hung on the wall. A battered desk occupied one corner, its surface scratched by years of use. Sarah was arranging her materials when the door opened and Mrs. Abernathy entered, followed by a stream of children ranging from tiny, wide-eyed youngsters to lanky adolescents on the cusp of adulthood. They filed in quietly, unusually subdued, as they studied their new teacher. "Good morning," Mrs. Abernathy announced crisply, As I mentioned yesterday, Miss Miller will be taking over your instruction from today. I expect you to show her the same respect you've shown me." She turned to Sarah with a nod. "They're all yours, Miss Miller. May God grant you patience." With that brisk introduction, the elderly woman departed, leaving Sarah facing 17 pairs of curious eyes. She recognized Eliza Jenkins among them, seated between two other girls of similar age. At the back, a boy of perhaps 14 slouched with studied indifference, while the youngest children fidgeted nervously in the front row. "Good morning," Sarah began, pleased that her voice emerged steady and clear. "I'm Miss Miller, and I'm honored to be your new teacher." A small boy in the front row raised his hand immediately. "Did it hurt?" he asked when Sarah acknowledged him. Sarah smiled, having anticipated this question after her exchange with Eliza. "Yes, it did. I was very sick with smallpox last spring, and when I recovered, these marks remained. They don't hurt anymore, and they aren't contagious. They're just part of me now, like the color of my eyes or the sound of my voice." Her direct answer seemed to satisfy most of the children. A few still stared openly, but without the fear she had dreaded. "Now," Sarah continued, "Mrs. Abernathy has told me you've been studying different subjects depending on your age and progress. I'd like each of you to introduce yourself and tell me what you've been learning, starting with the youngest." One by one, the children stated their names and described their studies. The pattern that emerged concerned Sarah. The older boys had focused almost exclusively on mathematics and practical measurements useful for farming and construction, while the girls had received more instruction in reading but little arithmetic beyond basic sums. The youngest children had been taught letters and numbers but little else. "Thank you all," Sarah said when they had finished. "Education is a precious opportunity. In this room, we'll explore the world through books and numbers, maps and natural philosophy. I believe every one of you is capable of learning all these subjects, regardless of your age or whether you're a boy or a girl." This statement earned her a skeptical look from the older boy at the back. Adam Richardson, she had learned, Thomas Richardson's grandson. The younger children, however, looked intrigued by the promise of exploring the world from their small classroom. Sarah divided them into 3 groups based on their current knowledge rather than strictly by age, giving each assignments appropriate to their level. As they worked, she moved among them, assessing their abilities and answering questions. By mid-morning, the initial awkwardness had largely dissipated, replaced by the familiar rhythm of learning. During the noon break, as the children ate lunches brought from home, Sarah noticed Adam Richardson sitting alone, his expression still closed and resistant. She approached him carefully, aware that challenging the grandson of Copper Ridges founder required particular tact. "You have a good mind for figures," she observed, referencing his quick work on the mathematics problem she had assigned. He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Don't need school for that. My father says I should be working full-time at the sawmill, not wasting time here." "Is that what you want?" Sarah asked. "To work at the sawmill?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Doesn't matter what I want. Richardsons have built this settlement from nothing. My place is continuing that work." Sarah considered her response carefully. "Building takes many forms. Your grandfather built with his hands, yes, but also with his mind, planning, calculating, leading. Education doesn't pull you away from your family's legacy. It gives you more tools to strengthen it." Adam glanced up at her, his defenses lowering slightly. "My father didn't have much schooling. He says books are for people who can't do real work." "Your father built something important here," Sarah acknowledged. "But the world is changing. The railroad will reach this territory within a few years. New settlements are forming every month. The future might require different skills than the past." She could see her words finding purchase in the boy's quick mind. He didn't respond, but his posture had shifted subtly, his attention engaged. Think about it, Sarah suggested, moving away to help a younger child struggling with letters. When school dismissed that afternoon, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion, but also profound satisfaction. The day had gone better than she had dared hope. The children's initial curiosity about her appearance had quickly given way to more typical classroom concerns, mastering new concepts, earning praise, avoiding extra work. As the last child departed, Sarah gathered her materials, her mind already planning the next day's lessons. She was surprised when a shadow fell across the doorway. "How did it go?" Rebecca asked, stepping into the classroom. "I've been dying of curiosity all day." Sarah smiled warmly at her friend. "Better than expected. The children were curious. About my scars, of course. But once I addressed it directly, they mostly moved on to more interesting topics." "Children adapt quickly," Rebecca agreed. "It's the parents I'm concerned about. Martha Jenkins has been talking all day, gathering support for a petition to Thomas." Sarah's heart sank. "A petition to remove me as teacher?" Rebecca nodded. Grimly, "She's convinced her Eliza will have nightmares. 3 other mothers have joined her cause so far." "And Thomas? Will he listen to them?" "Hard to say. He respects Emily's judgment, but he's also sensitive to discontent in the settlement." Rebecca sighed. "Politics in small communities can be more complicated than in big cities." Sarah gathered her courage. "I should speak with Dr. Richardson now, as he requested. Perhaps he can help me understand where I stand." They walked together through the settlement, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rutted main street. Copper Ridge was coming alive with end-of-day activities, men returning from the sawmill and farms, women hanging laundry or preparing evening meals, children playing in the spaces between buildings. Dr. Richardson's office stood at the western edge of town, a neat cabin with a small sign identifying it as the medical clinic. Sarah bid farewell to Rebecca and knocked on the door. Michael Richardson answered promptly, his expression brightening when he saw her. "Miss Miller, thank you for coming. Please enter." The clinic was meticulously organized, with shelves of labeled medicines, a sturdy examination table, and a desk covered with medical texts and journals. The doctor gestured for Sarah to sit in a chair near the desk. "I hope your first day of teaching went well," he said, taking his own seat. "It did, though I hear some parents are concerned about my presence," Sarah replied frankly. Michael sighed. "Martha Jenkins, I presume. She's been in twice today, complaining of palpitations caused by worry over her daughter's well-being. Will your father listen to her concerns?" "My father weighs all matters carefully. He'll consider Mrs. Jenkins' petition, but he'll also consider Mrs. Abernathy's endorsement and the practical reality that qualified teachers are scarce in the territory." Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But that's not why I asked you here. Your experience with smallpox is valuable from a medical perspective." He opened a journal on his desk, revealing pages of careful notes. "If you're willing, I'd like to ask you detailed questions about the progression of your illness, the treatments you received, and your observations of others who were infected." Sarah was touched by his professional interest. "Of course, though I must warn you, much of that time is a blur of fever and pain. Whatever you recall could be helpful. Smallpox has devastated communities throughout history, and understanding how some survive while others succumb might someday save lives." For the next hour, Sarah answered Michael's thoughtful questions, describing the progression of symptoms she had observed in her family and experienced herself. She spoke of the fever that had seemed to boil her blood, the painful eruptions across her skin, the crushing weakness that had left her unable to even hold a cup of water. Michael took copious notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly listening with intense concentration. When Sarah described how she had been the sole survivor among her immediate family, his expression grew thoughtful. "Have you considered why you survived when others did not?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. Jeremiah Holt, our preacher in Willow Creek, suggested it was either divine punishment or blessing, depending on his mood. Others thought it unnatural, even witchcraft. Michael frowned. "Superstition has no place in medicine. There must be physical reasons some bodies resist the disease more effectively." He hesitated, then added, "My mother and younger siblings died of fever when I was 12. That loss drove me to study medicine, to understand what I could not change." The personal revelation surprised Sarah. "I'm sorry for your loss. It seems we share that experience, at least." "Indeed." Michael closed his journal. "Thank you for speaking so openly. Your account will be valuable to my research." As Sarah rose to leave, Michael asked, "Have you had any luck finding ingredients similar to those in the Navajo medicine you mentioned? The reduction in inflammation is quite remarkable." "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "I'm not even sure what all the components." "Ah," Michael looked thoughtful. "Perhaps we could work together to identify them. I have some knowledge of native plant medicines, though the spiritual elements would be beyond my understanding." "I'd welcome your help," Sarah said sincerely. "The medicine has been not just physically healing." Michael nodded, understanding. "The mind and body are connected in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. I suspect your Navajo healer knows this intuitively." As Sarah departed the clinic, the sun was setting behind the mountains, casting the settlement in deepening shadow. She was halfway back to her cabin when a familiar figure emerged from between two buildings, limping slightly on his twisted leg. "Miss Miller," Jeremiah Holt greeted, his tone cordial. "I heard your first day of teaching went well." Sarah regarded him warily. The children were receptive. "And the parents? I understand Martha Jenkins is gathering signatures." "You seem well informed for someone so new to town," Sarah observed. Holt smiled thinly. "People confide in men of the cloth, even prospective uns. Martha sought spiritual guidance regarding her concerns about your situation." "And what guidance did you offer?" Sarah asked, already suspecting the answer. "I suggested she take her concerns to the proper authorities. In this case, Thomas Richardson." Holt's expression was bland. "Order and procedure are important in a community." Sarah felt a flare of anger. "You're undermining me deliberately, just as you did in Willow Creek." Holt spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I merely advised a concerned mother to address her worries through appropriate channels. If Richardson decides your presence is disruptive to the settlement, that's his prerogative as leader, and you would be conveniently positioned to offer comfort to those disturbed by my presence," Sarah concluded, "perhaps even suggesting that my removal would demonstrate God's guidance of the community." Something hardened in Holt's eyes. "You misunderstand me, Sarah. I bear you no ill will. But a community needs stability, clear boundaries between what is acceptable and what is not. Your appearance, through no fault of your own, challenges those boundaries." "My appearance reminds people of their mortality," Sarah corrected. "It's not me they fear, but what I represent, that safety is an illusion, that disaster can strike anyone." Holt inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her insight. "Perhaps. Regardless, Richardson will make his decision soon. The council meets tomorrow evening." He stepped past her, continuing on his way with measured steps. Sarah stood motionless for a moment, her mind racing. She had believed Copper Ridge might be different, that Emily's letter and her own qualifications would be enough to secure her position. Now it seemed her future hung once again on the judgment of others, on their ability to see beyond her scars. Lost in thought, she almost missed the small figure huddled on her cabin's porch steps. As she approached, the shape resolved into Eliza Jenkins, her knees drawn up to her chest against the evening chill. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, concern sharpening her voice. "Does your mother know where you are?" The girl looked up, her face tearful. "Ma says I can't come to school anymore if you're teaching, but I want to learn about maps and the world outside. I don't want to just learn sewing and cooking like she says girls should." Sarah sat beside her on the step. "Your mother wants what's best for you. She's worried about you." "She's not worried. She's scared of your face, but I'm not," Eliza declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Bobby Peterson has a big purple birthmark on his arm, and nobody's scared of him." The simple logic brought a smile to Sarah's lips. That's true, but adults sometimes have complicated feelings about things that remind them of sickness or danger. "It's stupid," Eliza pronounced firmly. "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged, "but your mother loves you. You need to go home now." Before she worries, "I'll speak with her tomorrow, see if we can find a solution that makes her comfortable." Reluctantly, Eliza stood. "Promise you won't leave, even if they say mean things?" Sarah hesitated, unwilling to make a promise she might not be able to keep. "I promise I'll do my best to stay and teach you about maps and the whole wide world. But now, let me walk you home, before dark falls completely." As they made their way through the settlement, Sarah was acutely aware of curious gazes following their progress. Eliza's small hand slipped into hers, an unexpected gesture of trust that threatened to unravel Sarah's carefully maintained composure. Martha Jenkins stood in her doorway, arms folded tight across her chest as they approached. Her expression shifted from worry to anger when she spotted her daughter. "Eliza Jenkins, I've been looking everywhere for you. Get inside this instant." Her suspicious gaze moved to Sarah. "What are you doing with my daughter?" "She came to my cabin, Mrs. Jenkins," Sarah explained calmly. "I'm returning her safely to you." "Stay away from my child," Martha hissed, pulling Eliza inside. "The council will hear about this tomorrow." The door closed with a decisive slam, leaving Sarah standing alone in the gathering darkness. She sighed heavily, the weight of the day settling onto her shoulders. It seemed her path forward would not be as straightforward as she had hoped. Back in her cabin, Sarah lit the lamp and stoked the fire in the small stove, grateful for the simple comfort of warmth and light. She had just settled at her table with one of her few books when a knock sounded at her door. Warily, she opened it to find Thomas Richardson standing on her porch, his imposing figure silhouetted against the night sky. "Mr. Richardson," she greeted, surprise evident in her voice. "Please come in." He ducked his head to enter the low doorway, his presence filling the modest space. He declined her offer of tea, remaining standing as he studied her with piercing blue eyes. "I understand there was an incident with the Jenkins girl this evening," he said without preamble. Sarah nodded. "She came to my cabin upset. I walked her home immediately. Martha claims you're trying to turn her daughter against her." His tone was neutral, giving no indication of his own thoughts on the matter. "That's not true," Sarah replied firmly. "Eliza is bright and curious. She wants to learn, and she's upset that her mother might prevent her from attending school." Richardson's expression remained impassive. "Martha Jenkins has gathered 6 signatures on her petition requesting your removal as teacher. She'll present it to the council tomorrow night." Sarah's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "And what do you think, Mr. Richardson? Do you believe I should be removed because my appearance frightens some parents?" He was silent for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "My sister Emily has always had insight into character that I sometimes lack. She sees beyond surfaces, to what lies beneath." He glanced around the small cabin, noting the books arranged carefully on the shelf, the slate board propped against the wall with tomorrow's lessons outlined in neat script. "You've made a place for yourself here quickly." "I've tried," Sarah said simply. Richardson stroked his beard thoughtfully. "My grandson Adam spoke at dinner about the mathematics problems you gave him today. More advanced than anything, Abigail. Assigned," he said. The unexpected information gave Sarah hope. Adam has a quick mind. He could benefit greatly from continued education. He also mentioned something you said about the future requiring different skills than the past. Richardson's eyes sharpened. An interesting perspective. "The world is changing," Sarah observed. "The children of Copper Ridge will face challenges we cannot yet imagine. Education prepares them to meet those challenges with confidence." Richardson nodded slowly. A compelling argument. He moved toward the door, then paused. "The council meets at 7 tomorrow evening. You should be present to speak on your own behalf." After he departed, Sarah sat by the stove, her mind spinning with possibilities. Richardson had given no indication of his own position, but the fact that he had come to hear her side suggested he was at least open to her remaining. She reached for her locket, opening it to gaze at her family's faces. "What would you do?" she whispered to her father's image. William Miller had been a man of quiet determination, someone who believed actions spoke louder than words. He would face this challenge directly, with honesty and dignity. The next day passed in a blur of teaching and preparation. Sarah threw herself into her lessons, determined to give the children her best, regardless of the council's upcoming decision. The classroom felt alive with energy as she introduced new concepts, challenging the older students while encouraging the younger ones. Even Adam Richardson participated more actively, volunteering answers and asking thoughtful questions. When school dismissed, he lingered, approaching her desk with uncharacteristic hesitation. "My grandfather said you'll be at the council meeting tonight," he said. Sarah nodded. "Yes, some parents have concerns about me teaching here." "Because of your face?" Adam asked bluntly. "Partly. And partly because change can be frightening, especially in a place where stability has meant survival." Adam frowned. "That's stupid. You're a better teacher than Mrs. Abernathy. She never explained why things work the way they do, just made us memorize facts." The simple endorsement warmed Sarah's heart. "Thank you, Adam. That means a great deal to me." As evening approached, Sarah applied Najoni's medicine with particular care, then changed into her best dress, a simple blue garment that had once belonged to her mother, carefully preserved through all her travels. She pinned her hair neatly and placed both the turquoise pendant and her family locket around her neck. Rebecca arrived just before 7 to accompany her to the meeting. "The entire settlement is talking about tonight's council," she reported. "Opinion is divided. Martha has her supporters, but others are impressed by what their children have already learned from you. What about Thomas? Has he given any indication of his position?" Rebecca shook her head. "My brother-in-law plays his thoughts close, but Michael spoke strongly in your favor at dinner last night, and Thomas respects his son's judgment." The meeting hall was crowded when they arrived, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The town council, Thomas Richardson, Jacob Turner, and 3 other men Sarah didn't know well, sat at a table at the front of the room. Jeremiah Holt had positioned himself prominently in the front row, while Martha Jenkins and her supporters clustered on one side of the hall. Sarah took a seat near the back, not wanting to appear presumptuous. As the murmur of conversation died down, Thomas Richardson called the meeting to order. "Our first item of business tonight is a petition submitted by Martha Jenkins regarding the appointment of Sarah Miller as teacher," he announced, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. "Mrs. Jenkins, please present your concerns." Martha stood, clutching a paper in her hands. "Mr. Richardson, council members, friends and neighbors," she began, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness or emotion. "I've gathered 6 signatures from parents who share my concern about having Miss Miller teach our children. While we sympathize with her unfortunate condition, the visible reminder of deadly disease is disturbing to impressionable young minds." She continued, her arguments a mixture of genuine maternal concern and thinly veiled superstition. "Furthermore, we question whether someone marked so severely by illness might carry lingering contagion or weakness that could affect our children's well-being." When Martha finished, Thomas acknowledged her with a nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this matter?" To Sarah's surprise, Mrs. Abernathy stood, her back straight despite her years. "I've evaluated Miss Miller's teaching abilities thoroughly. She possesses knowledge and instructional skill superior to any teacher we might reasonably hope to attract to our remote settlement. To dismiss her based on superficial concerns would be foolish." Murmurs swept through the crowd. The elderly teacher's endorsement carried considerable weight, given her years of service to the community. Next, Michael Richardson rose from his seat. "As the settlement's physician, I can state with absolute medical certainty that Miss Miller's scars pose no health risk whatsoever to the children or anyone else. Smallpox survivors are not contagious once recovered, and in fact, their presence during potential future outbreaks could be valuable, as they often demonstrate immunity to various diseases." Jeremiah Holt stood next, adjusting his posture to appear dignified despite his twisted leg. "While I respect Dr. Richardson's medical opinion, we must also consider the spiritual and moral implications. The children of Copper Ridge deserve teachers who represent the highest standards of our community. Miss Miller's appearance, through no fault of her own, serves as a constant reminder of suffering and disorder in God's creation." Sarah's hands tightened in her lap as Holt continued, his words carefully chosen to sound compassionate while undermining her position. This was the man she remembered from Willow Creek, using fear and religious authority to control those around him. When Holt finished, Thomas Richardson surveyed the room. "Would anyone else care to speak before we hear from Miss Miller herself?" A small commotion near the door drew everyone's attention. Eliza Jenkins broke away from her mother's grasp and ran to the front of the hall. "I want Miss Miller to be our teacher," she announced loudly. "She knows about maps and numbers and doesn't just make us do the same boring things every day, and her face doesn't scare me at all." Martha hurried forward, mortified to retrieve her daughter, but the girl's spontaneous endorsement had changed the atmosphere in the room. Several people smiled, and a few parents nodded in agreement. Finally, Richardson turned to Sarah. "Miss Miller, would you care to address the council?" Sarah rose and moved to the front of the room, conscious of every eye upon her. She took a deep breath, centering herself in the moment. "People of Copper Ridge," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I understand the concerns that have been raised tonight. Fear for our children is natural and right. It keeps them safe in a dangerous world." She paused, allowing her gaze to move across the assembled faces. "I arrived in your settlement carrying visible evidence of a devastating disease. These scars tell a story of loss and suffering, but also of survival and resilience. They are part of who I am, just as your experiences of hardship and triumph are part of who you are." Sarah touched the turquoise pendant at her neck. "A wise woman once told me that scars are not just marks of pain, but proof of healing. Each of you in this room carries scars, some visible, others hidden in your hearts. The trials you faced settling this land, building this community, have marked you just as surely as smallpox marked me." She could feel the energy in the room shifting, people leaning forward to listen more intently. I came to Copper Ridge seeking a place to belong, to use my knowledge and skills to contribute to a community. In the classroom, I've seen children eager to learn, to understand the world beyond these mountains. They deserve the best education we can provide them, whether it comes from someone unmarked by disease or from someone who carries visible reminders of life's fragility. Sarah gestured toward Eliza, who watched her with shining eyes. Children see with clearer eyes than we sometimes do. They recognize that appearances matter far less than character, knowledge, and kindness. Perhaps we adults could learn from their example. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Thomas Richardson's evaluating gaze directly. I won't pretend these scars don't exist or cover them to make others comfortable. They are testimony to what I've survived, just as this settlement is testimony to what you've all built together against considerable odds. I ask only for the opportunity to be judged by my work, my character, and my contributions, not by the marks life has left upon my skin. When Sarah finished speaking, the hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, from the back, someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause spreading until most of the room was participating. Thomas Richardson raised his hand for quiet. The council will deliberate on this matter. Miss Miller, Mrs. Jenkins, please remain. The rest of you may be excused. As the crowd filed out, Sarah caught Rebecca's encouraging smile and Michael Richardson's approving nod. Martha Jenkins stood rigid near the front, her expression a mixture of resentment and uncertainty. The council members conferred quietly among themselves for several minutes. Sarah waited patiently, prepared to accept whatever decision they reached. She had spoken her truth. The rest was beyond her control. Finally, Thomas Richardson addressed them. The council has reached a decision. Miss Miller will continue as teacher for a probationary period of 1 month. After that time, we will reassess based on the children's progress and community sentiment. He turned to Martha Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins, you are free to educate Eliza at home if you choose, but the council feels Miss Miller's qualifications merit this opportunity to prove herself. It wasn't an unqualified victory, but it was a chance, more than Sarah had received in any other settlement since the smallpox. As Martha Jenkins departed, her expression stormy, Sarah approached Thomas Richardson. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said simply. "I won't disappoint you." His stern features softened slightly. "See that you don't. Emily would never. Let me hear the end of it if I sent you away without good cause." He hesitated, then added, "Your words about scars showing healing, not just suffering, they have merit. This settlement has its share of both." As Sarah left the meeting hall, the night air cool against her skin, she felt a profound sense of possibility. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since losing her family, she could envision a future that held more than mere survival. A future that might include purpose, community, and perhaps even joy. The month passed swiftly, winter settling over Copper Ridge in a blanket of pristine white. Sarah's days fell into a rhythmic pattern, teaching by day, preparing lessons by night, gradually integrating herself into the community's routines. The children's progress had been remarkable, their natural curiosity blooming under her encouragement. Martha Jenkins had kept Eliza home for exactly 3 days before the girl's persistent pleading and the glowing reports from other children convinced her to relent. Now Eliza sat in the front row each morning, her eager questions pushing Sarah to expand lessons beyond what she had originally planned. On this particular morning, as frost patterns decorated the classroom windows, Sarah watched Adam Richardson demonstrating a complex mathematics problem for the younger students. The boy's confidence had grown considerably, his initial resistance replaced by genuine engagement. "Miss Miller?" 7-year-old Benjamin Turner tugged at her sleeve. Is it true what Adam says? That I can learn to build bridges someday if I understand these numbers? Sarah smiled down at him. Absolutely. Mathematics is the language that explains how the world fits together. Master it, and you can build almost anything. As the children worked on their assignments, Sarah's thoughts wandered to the council meeting scheduled for that evening. Her probationary period was ending, and Thomas Richardson would announce whether she could remain as Copper Ridge's permanent teacher. Despite the progress she'd made, uncertainty lingered. Jeremiah Holt had established himself as an influential voice in the settlement, conducting prayer meetings and offering counsel to troubled families. Though he no longer openly opposed her, Sarah often felt his critical gaze evaluating her every move. When school dismissed that afternoon, Sarah remained in the classroom, straightening benches and cleaning the slateboard. She had just finished when a knock sounded at the door. "Enter," she called, turning to find Michael Richardson standing in the doorway, a leather satchel in his hands. "Miss Miller," he greeted with a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Sarah assured him. "I was just preparing for tomorrow, though I suppose that depends on this evening's decision." Michael's expression grew serious. "That's partly why I've come. I wanted to show you something before the meeting." He opened the satchel and withdrew several small glass jars containing dried plants and powders. "What are these?" Sarah asked, moving closer to examine them. "I believe I've identified most of the components in your Navajo medicine," Michael explained. "This is juniper berry, this is sage, and this more unusual one appears to be a variety of moss that grows only at high elevations." He arranged the jars on a nearby desk. "I've been experimenting with proportions, trying to create something similar." Sarah stared at him in surprise. "You've been doing this for me?" A slight flush colored his cheeks. "For medical research," he clarified, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "The healing properties are remarkable. I've documented the continued improvement in your scars over the past month." Sarah touched her face self-consciously. The change had been gradual but undeniable. The angry red marks had faded to a softer pink, the texture smoothing as Nijoni had promised. "I've prepared a new mixture," Michael continued, producing another small pot. "It lacks the spiritual elements your healer included, but the physical components are as close as I could manage." Sarah accepted the gift, deeply moved by the gesture. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Michael replied, his voice gentle. "Your presence in Copper Ridge has been beneficial in ways beyond your teaching. You've challenged us to see beyond appearances, to question our assumptions." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared values, of mutual respect that might someday deepen into something more. The moment was interrupted by another arrival. Jeremiah Holt, his limp more pronounced, in the cold weather. "Miss Miller, Dr. Richardson," he greeted, his gaze moving between them with shrewd assessment. "Preparing for this evening's council?" Michael nodded curtly. "Miss Miller's position should be made permanent. The children's progress speaks for itself." "Indeed," Holt agreed, surprising them both. "I've come to inform Miss Miller that I won't be opposing her appointment tonight." Sarah regarded him warily. "That's unexpected. May I ask what changed your mind?" Holt smiled thinly. "Let's call it a recognition of political reality. The settlement favors your continuation as teacher. Opposing the will of the majority would be unwise." "How pragmatic of you," Michael observed dryly. Holt ignored the sarcasm. "Richardson has offered me the position of settlement preacher, with a cabin of my own and a modest stipend. I'll be focusing on building my congregation rather than educational matters." The subtext was clear. Holt had secured what he wanted, and no longer needed to oppose Sarah to elevate his own position. It was a coldly practical decision rather than a change of heart. "I wish you success in your new role," Sarah said neutrally. Holt nodded, satisfied with the polite exchange. "The council meets in an hour. I suggest you both be prompt." With that, he departed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Michael shook his head. A complicated man, self-serving, yet genuinely devoted to his particular understanding of faith. "He needs to be needed," Sarah observed. In Willow Creek, he maintained his authority by identifying threats and positioning himself as protection against them. Here he's found a different path to the same end. As they walked together toward the meeting hall, the settlement lay peaceful under the early evening sky. Smoke curled from chimneys, lanterns glowed in windows, and the distant sound of laughter drifted from the general store where neighbors gathered to socialize. Sarah felt a surge of affection for this place that had cautiously accepted her despite her scars. It wasn't the home she had lost. Nothing could replace Willow Creek as it had been before the smallpox. But perhaps it could become something equally meaningful in a different way. The council meeting was brief and decisive. Thomas Richardson, appearing pleased to dispense with formalities, announced that Sarah's position as teacher would be made permanent, with a modest salary to be paid from settlement funds. The assembled citizens responded with approval, even Martha Jenkins offering a reluctant nod. Additionally, Richardson continued, the council has approved construction of a proper schoolhouse to begin in the spring. The meeting hall will be needed for its original purpose as our community grows. This announcement drew enthusiastic response. A dedicated school building represented a significant commitment to Copper Ridge's future and to Sarah's place within it. As the meeting concluded, people approached to congratulate her. Rebecca embraced her warmly, Jacob clapped her shoulder with genuine pleasure, and even Thomas Richardson offered a rare smile and firm handshake. "My sister chose well," he said simply. "Emily always did have a knack for seeing what others missed." Bo. When the crowd dispersed, Sarah found herself walking toward her cabin alongside Michael Richardson, their steps naturally falling into the same rhythm. "Will you write to Emily?" he asked. "Tell her how things have turned out?" Sarah nodded. "She deserves to know her faith in me was justified." They paused at the path leading to Sarah's cabin. The night was clear, stars impossibly bright in the black sky, their light reflecting off the snow-covered landscape. "I've been meaning to ask," Michael said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "The pendant you wear, it's Navajo work, isn't it?" Sarah touched the turquoise stone. "A gift from Nijoni, the healer who helped me. She said it was protection and a reminder that paths that diverge may converge again." "Wise words," Michael observed. "Do you think you'll see her again?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I feel her influence every day, not just in the medicine for my scars, but in how I've learned to see myself as someone marked by strength, not just suffering." Michael's expression grew thoughtful. "I'd like to learn more about her healing methods. Perhaps when spring comes, we could journey to find her. The settlement could benefit from that knowledge, and Jeet, he hesitated, then continued more softly, "I would value the opportunity to know you better, away from the constraints of Copper Ridge." The invitation hung between them, full of possibilities neither was quite ready to name. Sarah smiled, warmth spreading through her despite the winter chill. "I'd like that," she said simply. At her cabin, a small surprise awaited. A package wrapped in oilskin on her porch steps. Sarah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book of world maps, its pages filled with detailed illustrations of distant lands and comprehensive geographical information. A note tucked inside read simply, "For your lessons, TR." The unexpected gift from Thomas Richardson moved her deeply. It represented not just acceptance, but recognition of her value to the community he had built and protected so carefully. Inside her cabin, Sarah lit the lamp and stoked the fire in the stove. As warmth spread through the small space, she opened her mother's Bible to the blank pages at the back, where she had begun keeping a journal of her experiences. She wrote of the council's decision, of Michael's reconstructed medicine, of Richardson's gift. Then her pen hesitated briefly before continuing. Today marks 6 months since I lost my family to smallpox. 6 months of wandering, of rejection, of searching for a place that might become home again. I cannot say that Copper Ridge is home. Yet, that word carries weight I'm not ready to assign, but for the first time, I can imagine it becoming so. I think of Nijoni often, of her quiet strength and wisdom. The marks are part of your story now, she told me. They tell of your strength, your survival. At the time, I couldn't see beyond the pain and loss they represented. Now I understand what she meant. These scars connect me to all I've lost, but also to all I've survived. They tell a story not just of suffering, but of resilience. The children accept me completely now. My scars are simply part of who I am, no more remarkable than Mr. Turner's spectacles or Mrs. Abernathy's white hair. Even Martha Jenkins nodded to me at the general store yesterday. Not friendship, perhaps, but a step toward peaceful coexistence. Michael speaks of visiting Nijoni when spring comes. The idea fills me with both anticipation and uncertainty. What would it mean to return to that place of transition? To introduce Michael to the woman who helped me begin healing? And what of Michael himself, whose quiet attention has become increasingly important to me? For now, I focus on each day as it comes. Teaching brings joy I had forgotten was possible. Watching understanding dawn in a child's eyes, seeing Adam Richardson discover his own capabilities, helping little Benjamin believe he might someday build bridges. These moments sustain me. The smallpox took almost everything from me, but not my capacity to build a new life. It marked my skin, but did not define my future. Each day, I choose to live as my father would have wanted, with purpose, dignity, and hope. In doing so, I honor those I've lost while embracing what remains possible. Tomorrow I will teach the children about distant lands using Mr. Richardson's maps. We will trace coastlines with our fingers, memorize mountain ranges, and imagine journeys across vast oceans. And in sharing these horizons with them, perhaps I expand my own as well. Sarah closed the journal and moved to the window. Copper Ridge lay peaceful under its blanket of snow, lanterns glowing in windows like earthbound stars. So different from Willow Creek, yet in its own way, becoming familiar, becoming a place where she might eventually belong. Touching the turquoise pendant, Sarah whispered a silent thanks to Nijoni, wherever she might be. The healer had seen past Sarah's scars to the healing that could follow, had recognized the strength that lay beneath her wounds. That gift of perspective had proven as valuable as the medicine for her physical scars. As Sarah prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the small mirror. The face that looked back was still marked by smallpox, still scarred by survival. But those marks no longer defined her. They were simply part of a more complex story, one that continued to unfold with each new day. Outside, snow began to fall softly, adding new layers to the landscape. By morning, the world would look different. The old covered over, fresh possibilities awaiting. Sarah smiled at the metaphor as she extinguished the lamp, ready to meet whatever tomorrow might bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.